I want to say this is a terrific event, and I'm really honored, deeply honored to join this panel. Let me say a few things by way of context, and then I want to come to your question. Uh, so the earlier panel talked a lot about efficiency and getting more out of the resources that are put into education, and I could not agree with it more. Agree with that point more. Even before COVID shut down schools for an unconscionable long period of time, the world was in a situation, developing countries were in a situation where a lot of children were not learning the basics in school. We call this learning poverty. And we estimated that over half of children in developing countries could not read by the age of 10. Now, COVID has made that even worse. And along with UNESCO and other partners, we've put out our latest estimates on learning poverty. And this suggests that the proportion of children in developing countries who will not read by age 10 is likely to go up from 50% to over 70%. So this is a huge blow on which national governments and the international community needs to be focusing. Now, we also know from our education finance watch, which we just launched with UNESCO, that the resources going into education are not at the level that they should be. David, you yourself spoke about 95% of the spending coming from domestic national budgets. And we know that countries are facing fiscal space issues. We also know that countries are being buffeted by crises. I mean, the impact, it's not just that, we've gone through COVID now because of the war in Ukraine, countries are being buffeted by food, fuel, and other crises. And we also know that, many parts of the world, it's not just Ukraine that's affected by conflict, there are other parts of the world affected by conflict. Now, in our education finance watch, what we have said is that in many countries, over 40% of developing countries, there's actually been a real decline in spending on education. So circumstances for recovering from learning losses are not propitious. We also make the point that international aid is flat. Bilaterals have pulled back and multilaterals have expanded. So in this context, what could we do? And now I want to come to your question. I would like to make three remarks. First of all, there is a lot that can be done within the context of national budgets, which doesn't necessarily require more resources. And this is what efficiency is all about. We have lots of good examples. I'd like to give the example of Brazil, the state of Ceará in Brazil, where they have been able to use financial and non-financial incentives to significantly pull up learning outcomes in schools. This is a good example which can be taken to scale not only in Brazil, but elsewhere. I'd also like to give the example of Cambodia, where they have been successful in making sure that textbooks are delivered to school in the right languages and in the right quantities at the right time. So this is within the purview of the government to do, and it's done it. And this is an example of an efficiency improvement. Finally, I'd like to give the example of Bangladesh, where the country has incentivized teachers, authors, community members to create books in the languages that children speak at home. And this is, again, within the purview of the government and is leading to a boost in literacy. So I think there's a lot that can be done with the resources governments already have. The second point I want to make is that the resources that governments already have are clearly not enough. We heard eloquently from the minister from Fiji, the minister from Malawi, about very limited absolute amounts that can be spent on education because of the size of national budgets. And here I feel it's very important for governments, even within the resources they have, to prioritize education. And David, you talked about austerity. I think it's very important to prioritize education within the fiscal space that exists, but it's also important for the international community to do more. And that brings me to my third point. I think there's a lot more that the international community can do. Let me speak about the World Bank and IDA, because that's the institution that I represent. IDA has expanded its support for education significantly. Just to give you some numbers, over the past 2 years, IDA has expanded its support to education by $6 billion US. That's a significant scale up from what IDA was doing previously, precisely in recognition of the fact that national budgets are strained. There was also a very successful replenishment of IDA 20, and this is the largest replenishment in the history of IDA. And one of the policy commitments is to put more resources into human capital and to education, and specifically to reducing learning poverty. And finally, my last point, I think we want to partner much more with other organizations, including GPE, which were in your previous panel, to make sure that we can come together and combine in support of the national education plan of each country. With that, let me stop.
Thank you.
I would say more, better, and sustained financing for results, so that young people and children can fulfill their potential.